And as you may have seen just a moment ago, I'm joined now by Graham Stuart, who's the Minister for Climate. A very good morning. Thanks so much for coming in. So, one story really dominating the front pages of the papers there, those warnings from National Grid. Do we have to accept that we need to brace ourselves for blackouts this winter?
Well, the National Grid published its report, as it does every year, yesterday, and it looks at various scenarios, including the more extreme ones. The good news, Anna, is that they've said on their sort of central scenarios that we're in a pretty good position compared to our other European neighbours. We're not dependent on Russian gas. We have nearly half our gas is produced domestically. We have solid and reliable suppliers like Norway, and we have the second largest LNG, liquid natural gas, infrastructure in Europe. So we're actually well positioned, but given the illegal and appalling war in Ukraine, given the pressures on our European neighbours with whom we have interconnectors and interdependence, then they've looked at all options. They've said it's very unlikely that there would be blackouts, but we, as a government and working with Ofgem and National Grid, we do everything possible to plan for all eventualities. And, given the war in Ukraine and Russia's appalling aggression, this winter has higher risks than we've seen in previous winters, but I wouldn't want to extend it more than that.
So was Liz Truss a bit rash in saying there'd be no rationing when she was campaigning for the leadership?
Well, what she said is that you can't. I just thought you were going to refer to the blackouts question, which is you can't guarantee what's going to happen. In terms of the nature of our energy supply, it's different from many of our European neighbours because we've got such a set of diverse supplies. We're not in the same position as being reliant on storage, without which we wouldn't be able to get through. And therefore, that's why when you look at things like energy efficiency and the messages to the public, that's why Ofgem are talking to big users, commercial users, as well as I think your story mentioned, those with the technology to be able to get help and reduce it.
We could be looking at rationing, planned blackouts. We could be looking at rationing.
We don't expect that to occur. That's not our expectation at all. But you've seen all sorts of things happening in recent weeks, and we plan for all eventualities, and the public should be confident that we have a very strong and diverse supply, that we've taken all the steps to look after our needs for this winter. And we're also, of course, taking, and the Prime Minister's been really focused on this, is making sure that we aren't in as vulnerable position ever again in future.
OK, so we can't rule out rationing. Should we all be trying to use less energy?
We're not sending that out as a message. All of us have bills, of course, and the bills have gone up. It's been one of the biggest steps and one of the boldest and most effective steps taken by the Prime Minister has been to step in and protect families and businesses from the rising costs, in families' case, for the next 2 years. And so, whereas there was talk that some people might be paying more than £6,000 for their energy, the average family, because what we're doing is intervening at the sort of unit of energy point, the average family on average use would not expect to be paying more than £2,500 a year. So that's meant that jobs as well as family finances are protected.
Yeah. So the energy support scheme, obviously welcomed by a lot of people, but why aren't you advising people to use less energy? Isn't that eminently sensible? I mean, we read this week that the Business Secretary signed off on a public information campaign to encourage people to save energy, but that was rejected by number 10.
No, the way we make policy is we look at all the options, including
why would that be rejected?
Well, the nature of our energy system's different. So there are good reasons why people might want to take a shower rather than a bath because it cuts their energy bills. Most of the time, except in peak, because of the nature of our energy system, it doesn't make any difference to our energy security. That's different in Germany. It's different in Holland.
But I'm not talking about Europe. I'm talking about this country.
Exactly.
And we understand, tell me if I'm wrong, that the Business Secretary signed off on a public information campaign to encourage people to save energy, which would also mean they'd save money, of course, as well, wouldn't it? But it was rejected by number 10. Can you confirm that happened?
I don't recognise that. We're in an iterative process of policy development and ideas, and we come to a conclusion. So the idea, there was some highly developed campaign which I'm the climate and energy minister passionately devoted to, and at number 10 nixed it. I don't recognise that. I don't think that's the way it was. And it's about getting the right messaging from the right partners, and you'll find through Ofgem and through the gov.uk website there is advice for people on how they can save on their family finances. But the last thing you want to do is tell someone switch things off for the national need when it makes no difference to the national security position. So that's why you've got to look at these things in the round and make sure you get the messages in the most nuanced and subtle and effective way possible.
So even though we get warnings from the National Grid, albeit in the worst case scenario that there could be planned blackouts, you still don't think it's worth telling people how they might be able to save energy, which incidentally will save them money too?
No, you're absolutely right, Anna. What they've tried to get is, if there were such a scenario, it would come at a very sharp point. So the fact that somebody hadn't, had reduced their energy usage a week before, or even a day before you get to a peak, wouldn't really make any difference to the security of supply. So that's why I know it looks like why it's obvious. Why don't you go out and tell everyone to use less energy? We think that we've got a diverse, strong supply, and in all the central scenarios, we're going to be fine. But we plan for everything, and we want to get that. I'm really grateful for you focusing on it today to get those messages out to people.
You talk about a diverse, strong supply. The UK is opening a new licensing round for companies to explore oil and gas in the North Sea. Isn't that, though, at odds with the government's policy on net zero? You're climate minister. What do you think?
No, absolutely not. I mean, what you have to remember is we've led the world on reducing emissions. We're the first major country to legislate for net zero. We have 5-year carbon budgets. If you look at gas and oil, we will be burning gas, albeit a quarter of what we do today, in 2050 under our net zero programme. And what you'll also see is that UK gas has a much lower emissions package around it than does imported gas. So the more that we can produce ourselves, the lower will be our emissions for the amount of energy which we burn, which is strictly limited by the framework set by the Climate Change Act.
Even though the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and the IEA, the International Energy Agency, both say there should be no new fossil fuel projects if we have a chance of meeting that 1.5.
Well, we're on a transition, and it is. I think on the projections I've seen, we should be on around 1-to-1 our investment at the moment. By 2030, it should be more. Mark Carney was saying yesterday it should be 4-to-1, but it's not 4-to-0. It's a transition, Anna, and we need oil and gas to keep the lights on. I think it's around 70% of our energy needs in the UK are currently based on fossil fuel. You've got to manage that transition, and it could be said that making sure that we have that orderly transition driven by investment in renewables, of which, of course, we're a world leader, and all your viewers can be extremely proud. It's important that we get that balance right, and it's that balance which we're striking today. And, of course, by producing our own gas, we've got more jobs, and we have more tax for the UK, and we make ourselves less dependent on regimes, some of which spend the money to buy missiles to threaten us with.
One of your fellow ministers, Steve Baker, said the UK can't afford net zero pledges in the short term. So do you agree with that?
We are committed to net zero. It's a matter of law. Of course we can. There are huge economic opportunities in net zero. You look at the jobs that have already come from offshore wind. We've now just changed the rules around onshore. My job from the Prime Minister, when I said to her when she appointed me to this role, what do you want me to do? Accelerate, she said. Accelerate offshore wind. Let's shorten the time it takes to get a new wind farm up. Let's make sure that we do it right. But it can't be right that the length of the permissioning time from kind of starting a project to having it first turning its blades has gone up as much as it has. So we're across the piece. We're looking to accelerate it. And we've got nuclear, and there was an announcement from Jacob Rees-Mogg around fusion, which is phenomenal potential technology. And we're hoping to be the first country in the world to have a prototype fusion plant, putting energy into the grid in 2040.
Why was King Charles advised by the government not to go to COP27?
Where King Charles decides to go, I think, is very much up to him.
But was he advised by number 10 not to go?
I don't know.
Even though you're climate minister, you don't? You don't know about that?
I don't know about that, but
Would you like him to go? He's worked in this field for decades.
I don't think
Would
it
you
is.
like him
I
to
don't
be
think
there?
it's for ministers on even on as esteemed a programme as yours, Anna, to be telling the King what he should or shouldn't do. But I mean, his role, of course, moving from Prince of Wales to King, has changed, and you know I'm very much looking forward to attending Sharm, as I will be, as will my Secretary of State, and carrying on the great work that we did in COP26. Because Alok Sharma, it's worth ending on a super positive of this interview, just 30% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges when he took up his presidency. It's now 90%. That's British leadership globally. And it's, you know, I think we can be inordinately proud of it, and we'll be following up that work at COP26 in Sharm.
You say end on a positive. I'm just going to bring one negative in, I'm afraid.
You wouldn't be a journalist if you didn't.
Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has accused the government of lurching to the right. She's warning your party facing a wipeout at the next election if you don't change course. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, we've just done with this energy support package one of the biggest interventions by the state to help people we've ever seen. The commitment to net zero is there. I don't recognise. I mean, you know, I know how bruising it can be when you leave government. You know, I think what I did, and I would certainly advise Nadine too, the best thing to do is just to, you know, settle down a little while and let the new team get on with the job. And that's what we're doing. And we're doing it in a way which is putting the long-term interests of the British people first, and in the meantime is intervening significantly to protect families and businesses across the country from what is a very troubled global environment.